See, if you want to be seen, activate your camera quickly, else just join via audio or simply watch. You have 4 minutes time now to make your decision and to jump in there. That's the transition period. Then you have 60 minutes in the breakout room. So I see you in an hour from now. Have fun.
All right, I guess we just wait 4 minutes and then we'll see how many people we get in and you can start, I guess.
And also meet them not here.
Well, Kava, shall we make a start? Your microphone is muted.
All right, so if you want to start, Okay, hold on. It's just. All right, so should we have started? So yeah, just say a few lines for the audience. Thank you very much for everybody for participating to this session, A Clean Ocean, Past, Present, and the Future, with Peter Kershaw. He's going to talk about this with us. Just a few lines for the audience. If you have any questions, please try to be sort of concise, and you can put it on the chat, and I'll pick up the ones that I can see during the presentation, and then we can ask Peter. And then towards the end, after presentation, we can also engage with Peter. If anybody has questions, you can get inside the sort of talk and start the conversation with Peter. And towards the end, the last few minutes, we try to sort of wrap up the whole session. And please keep all the videos and all the microphones muted if possible. I can unmute and mute, but please make sure everybody has the microphone muted. Thank you very much. Peter, you can start, please.
Okay, thanks very much, Kava, and thank you to everyone for joining this session. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My background is actually as a research scientist, and then more increasingly in the science policy sort of nexus. And these days, I work mostly within the UN system as an independent consultant. And I'm grey enough in the beard to remember the sorts of things we used to be worried about in the past, and how our focus for clean ocean has actually changed over the last few decades. So I wanted to go through that today and get some ideas from you. Because of technology issues, I'm going to have to ask Kava to operate the slides. So next one, please, Kava. I think you've missed one. Sorry, guess. Thank you very much. Okay, so I get this topic of past, present, and future because I think it's important that we shouldn't forget about the legacy of our past actions. But there are a lot of chemicals in particular, which and metals, which contaminate and pollute the ocean still, even though they nowadays have been regulated, but their legacy and their effects are still ongoing. And I've listed a few examples there. Present day, of course, we're still dealing with a lot of material which we're putting into the ocean, which is unregulated or under-regulated. Often it may be due to delays in assessing the risk, recognizing the hazard. In terms of chemicals, there is a huge complexity in the chemicals which are being used. We have thousands of new substances which are synthesized, new substances which are synthesized each year. And even when we do have regulation, there's often a lack of implementation and enforcement. And very often the costs, the social and the economic and the ecological costs go unrecognized or under-recognized. And I think these are all lessons we need to learn, because what we want to avoid is in future to try and spot these emerging issues, nip them in the bud. Whether these are novel chemicals, novel pharmaceuticals, whether it's due to new maritime sector activities like deep sea mining or wet renewables, and also thinking about the changes to ocean physics and chemistry we're already seeing and how that affects contaminant behavior as a result of climate change. And the thing which people have been worrying about for a long time but have find very difficult to deal with are the idea of cumulative impacts. Next, please. Thank you. I mean, the reason why we're worried about this, I mean, you could ask the question, so what if the contamination in the ocean? Well, we know that there are social costs, whether these are to do with human health or food security, food safety, loss of livelihoods, loss of cultural well-being. And we also know that there are a lot of environmental costs, whether it's compromising ecosystem services, biodiversity loss, damage to sensitive habitats or iconic species. And there are some direct economic costs, particularly for things like marine litter, direct costs from navigation hazards, beach cleaning, and so forth, and also indirect costs, which affect a number of maritime activities, sectors like fisheries and tourism. And I would encourage you, if you want to know more about this, to look at two recent publications. One is the Second World Ocean Assessment, which was launched just a few weeks ago. And the other is something called the Ocean for Climate Declaration, which is a document which is very new, as it came out of COP26, and it came to my attention actually this morning. So I'd recommend you go there and have a look, because the World Ocean Assessment gives a very good overview of the current status and impacts. Next, please. So we do have systems in place for responding when we see a problem in terms of ocean pollution. I think it's important that the reason why the oceans become contaminated in the first place, it comes down to a response to some societal demand for goods and services. Industries don't go out of their way just to pollute the environment for the sake of it. They're responding, and they're responding to a demand that we put on the industries for goods and services, which results in a process, produces goods we want. There's a use phase, and then there's an end of life phase. And unfortunately, at every stage of that process, that we admit wastes. Okay, we're not very good at our economy tends to be rather linear, and we're rather wasteful in how we use resources. And that then has an impact, like I've just described in the previous slide. And sometimes there's a policy response to that, as a result of which there's some regulation comes in, regulates the emissions, reduces the impact. But there's also a societal demand, and this is the one we're really thinking about today and through the decade, a societal demand for a clean ocean. And that in itself can then result in policy change, and because people don't like the impact that they're witnessing. So I think that model's worth keeping in mind. And there's just a few examples of where regulation has come into force. But the trouble with international regulation like that, it can take an awful long time from thinking about it for it being ratified. And when I say an awful long time, I mean decades. So it's not a perfect process, but it is one which is working. Next, please. And the other thing, of course, I mean, I'm sure you're all fully aware of this, but ocean pollution is a transboundary issue. And so the impacts may be felt far away from the source of the pollution, and also the societal benefit. So someone may be benefiting from some activity or some materials, but they're not the ones necessarily who are suffering the impact. So we know very well that we have long distance transport of land and sea-based sources because of ocean circulation, but there's also quite a lot of materials, particularly things like herbicides, pesticides, mercury, which are moved by atmospheric transport and deposited, and quite often in higher latitudes. And so the other thing we know is that, but is under-recognized, is that socially economic impacts are often disproportionately affect marginal communities and at-risk communities. And for all these reasons, I think knowledge sharing, capacity building are really absolutely essential. And I just put in 3 examples there of some rather just some nice modelled pictures showing transboundary nature of some, in this case, cesium-137 after the Fukushima disaster. Mercury deposition, which is from a variety of sources. A lot of that we're seeing there is some biomass burning, and a familiar view of mid-ocean gyres and the distribution of plastics. Next, please. The other thing that's not very is unevenly distributed is the capacity to understand some of these issues. This image is taken from an IOC report in 2017 on the global ocean, the state of ocean science, and it demonstrates the asymmetry of opportunity to generate and act on knowledge, and that's another very good reason why we need to make sure that capacity building is at the heart of the ocean decade. This image is just of the number of publications produced, and you'll see, particularly in the case of Africa, you know, it's severely underrepresented, and that's not because there aren't good scientists there. It's for a whole host of reasons. And you'll read there a quote from the implementation document from the decade, and that it is essential that we get much better at cooperation to make sure that everyone can engage in conducting science and communicating it. Next, please. There are existing mechanisms. The one I'm most familiar with is something called GAZAMP, the Joint Group of Experts on the Scientific Aspects of Marine Environmental Protection. I was the most recent chair before the current chair took over. It's been around for over 50 years. It was set up to allow different UN agencies to work together who had common interests in the sea. And it works mostly by setting up working groups, specialist working groups, and then we try and pull in the right expertise from around the world. And you'll see from our membership requirements what we try and do. 2 essentials are expertise and enthusiasm, because you don't get paid for this. And we try and cover natural sciences as well, and social sciences. And we also try and cover, make sure we have a good geographical representation and also gender balance. We like to encourage early career scientists as well. So this is a practical way of getting people working together for a common cause. And this is this little spotty map is for the working group I lead, which we've just set off on our new part of our work plan, and that shows that where we all come from. So it's quite a nice demonstration. Next, please. And we don't just look at plastics. We look at a whole range of other topics and harmful substances, ballast water, atmospheric inputs, ocean mining, biofouling, and most recently a working group on looking at the impacts of ocean acidification and warming on contaminant behavior. So we can't necessarily assume that the behaviors we've seen in the past will carry on like that because of changes in mobility and so forth. Next, please. Okay, and another one I know something about is for FAO. This is a practical program of capacity building, which is centered around Africa and the Bay of Bengal. It's a long-standing program, again, involves over 30 countries, and it has pollution aspects. It is relevant for several of the decadal goals, but in terms of clean ocean, it's looking at effects of the offshore oil and gas and plastics, microplastics, and food safety, and there's a big training element in there. So again, there are already within the UN system some quite good examples, which I think can be built on. Next, please. And then at different scales, of course, it's all very well looking at large scales, but we also, in practical sense, need to look at smaller scales, so regional, national, local scales. And again, there's already a good regional program in terms of the Regional Seas program, which do quite a lot of work on pollution-related issues. We have two other a commission and another program dealing with the Arctic and Antarctic. And then, of course, we need to involve national governments, institutions, industry, citizens groups, foundations, special interest groups, and so on and so forth. Next, please. And finally, the point I wanted to make, which is something that's been discussed quite a lot recently, certainly in the circles I move in, is the issue about data access, open access. And I just wanted to mention this because the decade strategy for data stewardship has a number of operates on a number of principles: fair, care, and trust. And the one what I've emphasized in bold here are the ones I think are particularly relevant to the idea of capacity development and building. That what we need to avoid is when we're talking about cooperation, it isn't appropriate for scientists from well-established labs in rich countries to go and work with in other parts of the world and basically publish the data because they're good at it and so forth. And again, this is important part of the implementation plan, where we talk about data management initiatives will be linked where relevant to the capacity development and transfer. And I think that's really important to keep in mind, which covers the whole of the program, but it also covers the clean ocean aspects as well. And I leave you with a quote from Mika Adido from IOC Africa, who makes a specific case for this in terms of Africa, because this was a regional consultation. So please bear that in mind. And that's all I was going to say. Well, in fact, is all I am going to say. And I'm going to hand you over now to Kava to start off the discussion. So thank you very much.
Hey, thank you very much, Peter, for your presentation, and it was very interesting. So I have a few questions, and then at the same time, I see that there one question from the audience, but we will have time if somebody wants to ask the questions directly to Peter, and just raise your hand. On the right side of the screen, on the bottom right, there is a hand. So if any of the audience would like to start the conversation and have a question from Peter, just raise your hand and then you can unmute and even share your screen if you would like. Share your camera and start your questions. So I don't see anybody at the moment. So I start one question. Dwight mentioned, what is wet renewables?
Yes, sorry about the jargon. It's a lazy way of saying new developments in things like tidal, wave generated power, underwater turbines. There's a new set of activities. So we're quite familiar with offshore wind, but there are also, certainly in Northwest Europe, I think elsewhere in parts of Canada, there's quite a lot of interest in using wave and tidal power and trying to capture that. So it's just an example of a new sector coming along, and it may be quite benign, but you know, sometimes these things have a habit of producing an unintended consequence, and so it's just to be a matter of being aware. It's nothing like, I think, what we'll see from the deep sea mining issue.
Okay, I understood. All right, I've got a question myself. So the outcome of the COP26 that we had a few days ago, how does that impact the sort of ocean pollution? Would that be another? I know it's a very general question,
Yeah.
but how do you see that in that context?
Well, I mean, I mentioned already that this is one aspect is the issue about if we put nothing else in the ocean, no other contaminants in the ocean from tomorrow, we still got an ocean full of, well, with an awful lot of contaminants in, and we want to try and understand how they behave and how we can mitigate the impacts and so forth, and maybe even try and clean it up. And I think one of the concerns is that the ocean chemistry. Sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yes, now it's okay. It got muted for a few seconds.
I think I leant on something. Sorry about that. So the ocean physics and chemistry is changing, and so even if there's nothing else going into the ocean from tomorrow, we still have to deal with what's there already, and we need to try and predict mobility, where it's going to go, how it's going to behave, what the fate is, and all the rest of it, particularly for things which may become more or less mobile because of changes in speciation and things like that. So there's that aspect, which what's going on at COP, it probably isn't going to affect that anytime soon. One of the things that bothers me a bit more is this sort of rush towards green technologies, and particularly for batteries, for electronics, and so on and so forth, because immediately that drives us towards needing, or potentially needing, more nickel and cobalt, and that then points straight in the direction of deep sea mining. So, and that's an extremely complex issue, because there's finance involved, there's all sorts of things involved. So that's one of the ones that should bother me. I can't answer directly what the result of COP will do. I think there'll be good things and bad things from it. I'm very happy to hear other people's views on that.
Okay, I understood. All right. Question that, so I see that people are starting to write questions. So I just wait till some question adds up. And in the meantime, I ask another question, which is sort of related to the previous one. Do we have enough knowledge at the moment to catalog the present types and sources of the pollution in the oceans?
We have a lot of knowledge, and so I think, and there have been attempts. I mean, I pointed out that World Ocean Assessment. So I mean, people have been trying to do this. Of course, you'd argue that we now have enough knowledge, but I think what's probably important is to try and do some form of risk analysis, or have a risk assessment approach to it. So try and work out what the most problematic things are. I mean, for example, my background a long time ago is in radioactivity. People used to get very, very excited about it. Politicians would make quite big decisions to stop having nuclear power, and lots of consequences of that in Germany, for example. But in fact, you know, it's in a sense, it's a non-issue now. And so the whole planet is contaminated with artificial radioactivity, but it's a kind of non-issue as far as impact is concerned, apart from a very few cases, I would maintain, like dump waste in the Arctic and so forth. So there are some things we know. We can say, well, we know enough about that to say, oh, okay, that's fine. There are a whole bunch of other things. The ones which worry me are where it may be a collection of substances which have a common impact. So endocrine disrupting compounds, for example, which are everywhere, and it's not just, you know, from the ocean. I mean, it's kind of nice to put it in a bucket saying that's the ocean pollution problem, but of course it isn't. It's like that. Life is more complicated. Endocrine disruptors, we can get them from so many different sources, including our houses. So there are things like that which are very complicated, and I think they're the ones which you have to worry more about, not the ones which are easy to deal with. And I know at the moment everyone's concerned about plastics, and that's what I've been spending the last few years doing. But is it the most important issue in terms of impacts, whether that's social, economic, or environmental? That's a very good question, and I don't think we know enough to rank those. We can just say we think, yes, this is important, and this is important, this is less important. But let's try and stop this other thing becoming important because we act a bit earlier.
Okay, understood. So we have one question which is kind of similar to what I have here. So I asked both, so maybe you can make a sort of answer to both at the same time. So Dwight is asking, you mentioned a whole range of pollution issues. Among these, which are the most important for urgent actions? And then my question would be on top of that, can we map the current... Hold on. Okay. Sorry, somebody's microphone was on. So my question on top of that would be, could we map the current distribution and impacts of pollution in order to rank and prioritize the action for them? So which is sort of related to the other question.
I don't think we're in a state where we could do the prioritizing very well, because we need common methods. I mean, one of the things that the working group I'm in, which is dealing with plastics and microplastics, the next thing we're trying to do is come up with risk assessment frameworks. Now, risk assessment, you can do risk assessment on individual chemicals quite easily, in labs. But when you get to mixtures of chemicals, you've got multi-stressors, like we've got ocean warming, we've got noise, we've got impacts on scope for growth or whatever it is, then you've got multiple stressors. And so I don't think we have the methods at the moment, but it'd be lovely to be proved wrong to do that. I'm just saying I think it's important to try and do that, and I think we need to try and develop methods to allow us to do that, because we cannot do everything at the same time. We somehow have to put some priorities onto things.
Okay, understood. So we have Dwight asking a few questions. Dwight, would you like to...
Yeah, I think we need to see Dwight.
Yeah, would you like to sort of ask the questions directly? If you would like, just turn on your microphone and video camera even, so you can ask the question if you like. Otherwise, I ask Peter.
Actually,
Hello.
I'm very interested.
Hello.
Hi. I'm actually very interested in Prasad's question about pharmaceuticals, so I'll defer to Prasad's question. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking about all these topics. I'm not an expert on any of them. Yeah, but what I do know is that there's a unit in UNEP now which is particularly interested in pharmaceuticals and wastewater, because I mean, you'll be aware that in richer countries in Europe, North America, most of the pharmaceuticals will be captured in wastewater, and they may or may not be treated, and they may or may not go through some form of sterilization, which may or may not have an impact. But in most parts of the world, that doesn't happen. And we're using pharmaceuticals more and more. We're using them for human health, but we're also using an awful lot for intensive livestock production. And I think that's, from my perspective, I think that's it is really it's an understudied issue, and I think it's one that deserves further attention, if not for nothing else, that a lot of the discharges will be into rivers, and they'll be into coastal waters, and these are areas where we have much more interaction. But we may have fisheries, we may have people swimming and tourism and so forth, and we have coastal aquaculture and so forth. So I can't give you any much more detail about that, except to say I think it really is quite an important issue which needs more attention, and it's something which ain't going to go away because it's something which we're using more and more. So I'm afraid that doesn't necessarily answer your question, but I Prasad. But if you have anything else to add to that, that'd be good.
George, would you like to continue on the questions?
Hi again. Yeah, I'm just interested in all of this, and I guess the overarching question is, there are so many issues. There's not a lot of awareness among the general population of many of these issues, most of them, and it seems to be such an intractable long-term problem that we're just piling on day by day. So it seems like a Gordian knot, and where can we start to really make headway with this host of issues?
Well, I mean, we do have mechanisms. So for hazardous substances, or for POPs, persistent organic pollutants, we have the Stockholm Convention now established. We have the Minamata Convention to try and regulate the use of mercury more, but of course there's an awful lot of illegal mercury use in illegal gold mining. So you can set up these mechanisms, and everyone can agree to them, and it's great. You need them. Minamata took 10 years, right? That was from inception to ratification. That was really, really quick. Okay, so that's how long these sorts of things take. But it doesn't stop all the illegal gold mining in Brazil and places. And we have MARPOL, which manages ocean pollution from ships, and pollution from ships gone right down. In far fewer oil spills. Tank washing is much better than it was, etc., etc. So there are success stories. They take a long time, and sometimes the impact is already out there and takes a long time to go away. We've got Basel Convention, which looks after transport of waste materials and waste dumping. So we do have a number of things. With regarding plastics, we're looking now at the United Nations Environment Agency, the next meeting, which is in February this year, to try and get agreement on setting up an international or intergovernmental negotiating committee, which is the first stage of coming up with a new agreement or convention, right? So that may well happen in February. So there are things which are good, which are happening, but then your question here is regarding endocrine disruptors, which I raised. You're asking whether it's the case that some of these are plastics additives, or that they have that property, and that is the case. Yes, certainly. And in fact, I was talking about it with my wife this morning, who used to do biological research, and depending on what type of petri dish you used for your experiment, you might get different answers from because of the chemicals coming out of them. So, and I think with the deep ocean mining, we have the International Seabed Authority. So there is a mechanism, whatever you think how effective it is, blah blah blah. So we're getting better, I think, at setting up these mechanisms. International ones take ages. I think industry, voluntary agreements, societal pressure. You need to engage everybody, and you need people to become more aware. That's why this knowledge sharing is important. You ask also about oxygen decline, and it's another enormous problem of low oxygen areas, dead zones, because we pump far too much sewage out. We pump far too much fertilizer down the Mississippi and rivers like that, and that's just going to get worse if populations just go up. So, but it's that sort of out of sight. You know, there's this issue about being out of sight, out of mind, and somehow we need to turn that around. And the plastics issue, because it's so visible, is one where I think you can make some ground with, and use that as a model for some of these other things which are less visible, but actually still really important. That's my hope for where the plastics issue is going anyway.
All right, thank you. We have a question from Leonard. Leonard, would you like to unmute yourself and ask a question yourself, or would you like me to ask it myself? Just audience, please feel free to engage the conversation. Huh? It's not two-way sort of thing. You can, if anybody like, you can join in the conversation. We can't hear you. I think you're muted. Okay, so you're unmuted, but we still can't hear you. Still not. I'm sorry, I can't do a voiceover, but okay, I can read the question. So, will there, or is it already established and research bank for plastic pollution?
Leonard, well, where I can point you in the direction of is an initiative from UNEP. In fact, I was talking about it at a meeting with them yesterday, where they're setting up a sort of capacity building initiative to make information more available on a platform, interactive platform, on initiatives, on research projects, etc., specifically about plastics. So there's something called the Global Partnership on Marine Litter. You may have come across it if you tap in, I think it's gpmarinelitter.org, something like that. Anyway, if you search for it, you'll come across it. And this is it's been an initiative which has been around for some years now, which attempts to bring together governments, NGOs, industry representatives, academics, with common interest. But this new development is a sort of interactive platform where you can go in and interrogate and find out more about this. Now, also, I'm probably going to be rather vague on this, but that there have been moves by a number of different groups to improve access to information about plastic litter. That the Environment Ministry of Japan has an initiative on microplastics, for example, and there are a number of databases, including one in Europe, the IODE, to make certainly European plastics data more available. And so we're kind of moving in that direction, right? I don't think I'm not sure we need one research bank, but the idea, I think, is to have the links, the interoperability, so having gone to one place, you can find your way around the system. But I think the most comprehensive one will be coming out of UNEP. And so if you want to know more about that, please contact me separately, because I can't give you the links off the top of my head just now. I think we've had too many questions from people with beards. I think we need we need to get a better gender balance.
Is anybody else would like to ask a question?
even if you have a beard.
All right, so if not, I'll ask a question myself. So maybe another general one, but do we have enough knowledge? Like I have, let's focus on plastic. Do we have enough knowledge to prevent plastic ending up in the ocean, or sort of remove those plastic back to the sources, like removal? Is our knowledge is there at the moment?
That it's it's an easy question, right? And the answer is yes, but no, but
Okay.
because again, if you're sitting in Europe and you have very good waste collection and waste disposal, and you have a system which either is a very effective recycling or energy, waste to energy. If you have very good wastewater systems and wastewater processing, which removes the microplastic particles from the sludge before you put it on agricultural land. If you go to Sweden, you might, but that's it, right? I mean, if you go anywhere else, it's not going to be as good as that. And as I said, most of the planet doesn't have proper wastewater collection, and most of the planet probably doesn't have proper or very adequate solid waste collection. So technically, a lot of these things are possible. Socially, practically, economically, culturally, it's not going to happen anytime soon. I think is the issue, and I think you need a multi-pronged. You need solutions which are appropriate for the circumstance, and of course the main thing is going back to the old idea of the 3 R's, which is to reduce. I can't remember what they are now. Reduce, reuse, recycle. So don't produce it in the first place. If you do produce it, keep using it. And when you stop using it, recycle it in some way or other. And so that's for plastics. And that's great, but you need solutions which are appropriate for the setting. And I mean, I'm working at the moment on a project in West Africa. And in terms of infrastructure, it's really poorly developed in a lot of countries. And so it's really difficult. It's just really, really difficult to know when your fishing net's full of litter. I mean, people use plastic bags for drinking water. Why? Because that's how you get drinking water. There's no drinking water supply. So you need all these other things, and if you link it up to the Sustainable Development Goals, the topic we're talking about is in 14.1. But it ain't, because if you want to do anything about it, you have to look at all those other goals about poverty reduction and clean cities and clean water and so on and so forth, because they're why you want to change things. So if people have clean drinking water, they don't need polythene bags to put it in, right? It's so you have to look at the whole system. And in the West, we talk an awful lot about the circular economy, and but again, it has to be appropriate. You can apply those principles in lots of different places, but you have to have solutions which are appropriate for the regions and the people and so forth.
Okay, so that means basically we do have the knowledge and technology to prevent it. It's just a matter of managing and transferring that technology to the countries that they don't have. But the basic knowledge is there. Is that correct?
There is enough knowledge there.
Okay,
there's enough knowledge. I mean, you're always going to want more to make it more effective and so forth. Krista, sorry.
Yeah, Krista. Would you like to join, Krista? You can ask the question yourself if you like.
Hi. Good morning or good afternoon from Puerto
Yeah.
Rico.
All right, hello.
Yes. So this has been a very interesting conversation. And I work in the field of tsunamis, and one of our, looking for resilience to tsunamis. And one of our main approaches is working with the communities, the local communities, and getting them engaged and empowering them to develop strategies and their response plans. And very often I've seen that when they become aware of their hazards and their risks, and they often push up the chain. They go from local, then they go to the regional, and they push the national. They said, well, look, you need to put in sirens, or look, you need to have a better national plan. Your plan really doesn't, it doesn't fit our community. So we really see, it working very strong, direction. And so I'm wondering, very often we work at things from the region, international level, local level. So, in this discussion, the role of local communities that are the main ones that are, they're the ones that are affected, and their economies affected, their health's affected, the beauty of their landscapes affected, how can they be more engaged and perhaps help accelerate some of this change instead of waiting for, things to trickle down from international to regional to national decision-making process. So we have a program called Tsunami Ready. Do you have a program called, beaches, clean beaches or something like that?
But I know someone who does, who works in the Bahamas. So perhaps I ought to put you in. I ought to put you in touch with them, because she's a bundle of energy and works with local communities. I think there's some good examples out there, and I think it's really important. And one aspect which I've kind of talked to people about is the idea of citizen science. And these days, everyone, it appears, has a mobile phone, and people have produced apps to help identify and photograph and so forth, and with instructions. And so if people want to, if communities want to, groups want to, they can take part in sort of citizen science projects, or to monitor and so forth. So there's some good examples of that. But I think what you're talking about as well is more of it's partly an advocacy. Getting a local advocate or advocacy group. And I'm hopeless at that, because I hardly talk to my neighbours. But that there are people who do that and do it very well. And there's a famous, I can't remember his name now, lawyer in living near Mumbai, who didn't quite create a national movement, but certainly created as a Mumbai-wide movement to clean the beaches there. And so you get these pockets, these examples, and I think all I can say is more power and learn. And I'm not sure how I personally can give you any more advice on that, but because it's something I recognize as being really important, but it's not something I personally have been involved with. I'm afraid I'm more at the sort of the higher end bit, where it's a bit more top down. So I'm not sure that's very helpful.
Yeah, so Peter, very often we've seen that, the high end, I respect that I'm part of that high end process too, but we've benefited so much from the local, knowledge and the local communities, that sort of, say this works and this doesn't work, because it gives us a reality check, and somehow to more officially bring them in the process. Because I think a lot of these things are volunteer, they're not very funded. So it just depends on, you have that local champion, right?
Yeah.
And if we depended on local champions to get the world tsunami ready, we'd have very few communities that are tsunami ready. We have many communities that are tsunami ready because an agency has stepped up and provided funding to help those communities and empower those communities. It goes beyond local resources. So I think, it's identifying funding at these communities that can provide invaluable information, like you're saying, through citizen science. But a lot of these communities are low income communities or low resource, and And why should they be doing everything for free? They don't have that.
I think that they make a very fair point, and it's not a very resilient system if it's dependent on one or two individuals, because they move, they retire, they whatever, and so through the UN United Nations Environment Assembly, and generally there are these major groups, so a major group of women's major group, and I know there are people there who've been working with various indigenous communities in I think New Zealand and Canada, for example. So there are people who are doing that, and it's a bit more what's formalized, if you like. But I'm afraid I can't personally can't help you anymore. But I can put you in touch with this lady I know in Bahamas who would be very helpful for you.
Now, she's been engaged. I can't remember her name either in the UN decade.
Crystal.
America. Yes.
Crystal Ambrose.
Tropical America. She has been engaged. So, I don't know how much more time we have. I have a sort of very different question.
All right.
But you probably have other people that want to make their interventions.
I don't think we do at the moment, unless.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm not sure how many. I think only a few minutes we have.
So one thing, just quickly, this thing about citizen science and pictures, and they're so impactful. But on the other hand, when you're from that community and you have the beach, you don't exactly want to post. There's a stigma associated with it, right? So how do you deal with, it's tough because you want people to visit you, you want them to come to your restaurants. You don't exactly want to be putting the pictures of, we found all this plastic here, our beach is dirty, and we've had a lot of pushback from beaches, when we've given out scientific information, the beach is not safe to go to or something like that. People get upset because they're like, you're messing up my economy. So I think that's why this dialogue between, it's not just us, it's a lot has to do with the livelihoods of people and other social issues, not just the science of the plastics.
I think there has to be a benefit. There has to be a benefit of the people doing it. It can't be just because you think it's important. There has to be a benefit. And so I didn't explain when I talked about taking photographs. This is in terms of doing litter surveys and recording it, and people like NOAA in the States, collate this information. And so it wasn't so much about putting it up on social media. It was for doing the survey and identifying this is what I found type of thing. So yeah, I'm absolutely with you, because that there has to be a benefit to the people involved. Otherwise, yeah.
All right, thank you very much. So I think we're sort of at the end of the session, because they just announced the sort of wrap-up section. So thank you very much, Peter, for an interesting topic, and thank you very much everybody who participated. And let me see if there is anything there. No, I think we are at the end of the session. So Peter, I think you assume you're going to the sort of summary session, right?
Yeah, I have to go in WebEx into the summary. But thank you very much, everybody, for the small, select but distinguished group of people who gathered, and I appreciate it. And if you do have any more questions about anything, which I might be able to answer, then please get in touch with me. I think my email should be somewhere on the Clean Seas website.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a good evening or morning or night wherever you are. Goodbye.